You've been doing the work, the therapy sessions, the journaling, the shadow work, the crying in the shower at 3 in the morning. You've been showing up for yourself in ways no one sees. And yet, some days, you look in the mirror and wonder if anything has actually changed. You still feel broken. You still carry pain. You still struggle. But what if I told you that healing isn't always visible? What if the deepest transformation happens so quietly that you don't even recognize it's occurred? Carl Jung understood something that most people miss about healing. He knew that wholeness doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't arrive as a moment of sudden enlightenment where everything makes sense and you're finally fixed. Instead, it shows up in subtle shifts, in small changes, in quiet moments where you realize you responded differently than you would have a year ago. Today, we're going to explore 6 signs that you've healed more than you realize, based on Jung's profound understanding of the human psyche and the journey toward wholeness. If you're someone who's been on a healing journey and you're not sure if you're making progress, if you feel like you're still broken, even though you've been doing the work, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because what we explore here will help you recognize the healing that's already happened within you, the transformation you can't see yet because you're still too close to it. The first sign Jung would point to is this: you no longer chase closure. There was a time when you needed answers, when you needed explanations, when you needed the people who hurt you to acknowledge what they did and apologize for it. You spent hours replaying conversations, imagining what you should have said, rehearsing confrontations that would never happen. You believed that healing required other people to validate your pain, to admit their wrongs, to give you the closure you deserved. But something has shifted. You've stopped waiting for apologies that will never come. You've stopped needing explanations for why people treated you the way they did. You've realized that closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you create within yourself. This is profound psychological maturity that Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole independent of external validation. When you stop chasing closure, you're no longer giving your power away to people who've already taken enough from you. You're recognizing that your healing doesn't depend on their acknowledgement, their apology, or their understanding. You've closed the door yourself, not because you got the answers you wanted, but because you realized the question itself was keeping you stuck. This is healing, even if it doesn't feel triumphant. It feels like quiet acceptance, like finally putting down a weight you didn't realize you were still carrying. The second sign you've healed more than you realize is that you no longer need to be understood. This one cuts deep because for so long, being misunderstood felt like a form of abandonment. You spent so much energy trying to explain yourself, defending your choices, justifying your boundaries, making people understand why you had to walk away, or why you couldn't keep giving, or why you needed space. You believed that if people truly understood you, they would stop hurting you, stop judging you, stop demanding things you couldn't give. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the projection problem, the way people see not who you are, but their own unconscious material projected onto you. When you finally understand this, when you realize that most people's opinions of you have nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own unresolved complexes, something liberating happens. You stop trying to control how others perceive you. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you've developed what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to know yourself so deeply that other people's misunderstanding no longer threatens your sense of identity. You can let people believe whatever they want about you because you know your own truth. You can be misinterpreted, misrepresented, misunderstood, and it doesn't shatter you the way it once did. You've stopped performing your pain to prove it was real. You've stopped over-explaining your boundaries to people who weren't going to respect them anyway. You've stopped trying to make people see your worth when they're committed to devaluing you. This is maturity. This is healing. This is you finally understanding that your value isn't determined by consensus. The third sign is that you stop romanticizing the past. Jung understood that nostalgia is often a defense mechanism against the present, a way of avoiding the reality of now by idealizing what was. There was a time when you replayed your memories like favorite movies, editing out the painful parts, softening the betrayals, making excuses for people who didn't deserve them. You told yourself stories about how good it used to be, how special that connection was, how you'd never find anything like that again. But healing brings clarity. The fog lifts. You start seeing the past for what it actually was, not the fantasy version you constructed to make the loss more bearable, but the reality that includes all the ways you compromised yourself, ignored red flags, accepted less than you deserved. You recognize that what you're grieving isn't what you actually had, but what you hoped it could become. This isn't cynicism, it's honesty. Jung called this shadow integration, the willingness to see the full truth, including the parts that are uncomfortable or disappointing. When you stop romanticizing what was, you stop being haunted by it. You can finally be present to what is, rather than constantly comparing it to an idealized version of what was. The fourth sign you've healed more than you realize is that your solitude no longer feels lonely. There was a time when being alone felt like punishment, like proof that something was wrong with you. You filled every quiet moment with noise, scrolling, binge-watching, constantly checking your phone, anything to avoid being with yourself. The silence was unbearable because in it, you heard all the voices telling you that you weren't enough, that you were broken, that no one would ever truly love you. Jung spoke about what he called the necessary solitude of individuation, the recognition that becoming whole requires time alone with yourself, not running from yourself. Healing happens when solitude transforms from something you fear into something you protect. When being alone stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like coming home to yourself. You've reached a place where you can sit with yourself without judgment, without the desperate need to fill the space with someone else's presence or validation. You can eat dinner alone without feeling pathetic. You can spend a weekend by yourself without feeling like you're missing out. You can enjoy your own company because you've finally become someone worth spending time with, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've accepted yourself. This doesn't mean you don't want connection or that you've become isolated. It means you're no longer willing to sacrifice your peace for the illusion of companionship. You're no longer settling for relationships that make you feel more alone than being by yourself. You've learned to distinguish between healthy solitude that nourishes you and isolation that depletes you. This is profound growth, even if it looks quiet from the outside. The fifth sign is one of the most powerful indicators of healing. You respond, not react. Jung understood that emotional reactivity is a sign of being possessed by your unconscious complexes. When something in the present triggers something unresolved from the past, and suddenly you're not responding to what's actually happening. You're reacting to old wounds. You've probably noticed this shift without naming it. Someone does something that used to send you into a spiral, and instead of the immediate emotional hijacking, there's a pause, a space, a moment where you can choose how to respond rather than being swept away by automatic reaction. This pause is everything. It's the gap between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl wrote about, and it's where your power lives. You're no longer controlled by your triggers the way you once were. You can feel anger without becoming it. You can notice hurt without drowning in it. You can recognize when your reaction is disproportionate to the situation and trace it back to the original wound rather than making it about the present moment. This is what Jung called making the unconscious conscious, bringing awareness to the patterns that have been running your life from the shadows. When you respond instead of react, you're no longer at the mercy of your emotional history. You're no longer repeating the same patterns, having the same fights, attracting the same dysfunctional dynamics. You've broken the cycle, not by suppressing your emotions, but by understanding them deeply enough to choose differently. The sixth and perhaps most beautiful sign that you've healed more than you realize is that you begin to create instead of escape. For so long, you were in survival mode. Your energy went into coping mechanisms, into numbing strategies, into anything that would help you get through another day without falling apart. You weren't living. You were enduring. You weren't creating. You were escaping. Jung understood that creativity is a function of psychological health, a sign that libido, not sexual energy in the narrow sense, but life force itself, is flowing again. When you're wounded, that energy is bound up in survival, in defense, in maintaining the walls that keep you safe. But when healing happens, that energy becomes available for something more than just getting through the day. You've noticed this shift, perhaps without fully recognizing it. You started writing again, or painting, or cooking elaborate meals, or rearranging your space, or finally working on that project you'd been postponing for years. You're no longer just consuming content to numb yourself. You're creating things that express who you're becoming. You're building a life that reflects your authentic self, rather than just surviving in one that reflects your wounds. This doesn't mean your life is suddenly perfect, or that you've transcended all pain. It means you've transformed your relationship with suffering. Instead of being consumed by it, you're alchemizing it into something meaningful. Jung called this the opus, the great work of transforming the base material of your pain into the gold of wisdom, art, and authentic self-expression. When you create, you're no longer just a victim of your story. You're becoming the author of it. You're deciding what your experiences mean, how they've shaped you, what you want to do with the lessons you've learned. This is the ultimate reclamation of power, taking what tried to destroy you and using it to create something that couldn't have existed without that exact pain. There's a quiet realization that comes with this kind of healing, one that Jung spoke about extensively in his later work. You begin to understand that you were never actually broken. You were wounded, yes. You were traumatized, perhaps. You were hurt in ways that fundamentally changed you. But broken? Number. Something in you remained intact through all of it. A core self that couldn't be destroyed no matter what happened to you. Jung called this the self with a capital S, that central organizing principle of your psyche that was always whole, always there, just buried under layers of pain and defense mechanisms and false identities. Healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about removing what was covering what was always whole. You start recognizing this wholeness in moments that surprise you. A situation that would have destroyed you a year ago barely disturbs your peace now. A person who would have had power over you no longer does. A memory that used to torture you has lost its charge. You're not numb to it. You've just integrated it. It's part of your story now, not the whole story. It's one chapter, not the entire book. This recognition brings a kind of freedom you didn't know was possible. The freedom to be imperfect and still worthy. The freedom to have been hurt and not be defined by it. The freedom to carry scars and still be beautiful. The freedom you didn't notice arriving shows up in the smallest moments. You catch yourself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. You realize you went an entire week without thinking about the person who used to occupy your mind constantly. You notice that the anxiety that used to wake you at night has softened into something manageable. You're sleeping better, not because life got easier, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. Jung understood that true healing creates what he called psychological peace, not the absence of problems, but the presence of an inner stability that remains regardless of external circumstances. You're no longer being tossed around by every wave. You've found your center, and while you still feel the storms, they no longer capsize you the way they once did. If you've recognized yourself in these 6 signs, if you're beginning to see that you've healed more than you realized, subscribe to this channel because we explore the depths of Jung's wisdom about transformation, healing, and becoming whole. Your journey matters, And recognizing your growth is part of honoring how far you've come. You've developed what Jung called the observing ego, the part of you that can witness your experience without being completely identified with it. You can feel sadness without becoming sadness. You can notice fear without being consumed by it. You can experience pain without believing that pain is all you are. This capacity for self-observation, for holding your experience with compassion rather than judgment, is one of the greatest gifts of healing. The people in your life might not notice these changes. They're not dramatic or performative. You didn't suddenly become a different person. You're still you, just a version of you that's no longer held hostage by your past. A version that can carry both your history and your hope. A version that understands that healing isn't linear, isn't final, isn't about arriving at some perfect state of enlightenment. Jung spent his life studying what he called the individuation process, the journey of becoming who you were always meant to be beneath all the conditioning, trauma, and false selves. He understood that this journey doesn't have a destination. You don't cross a finish line and suddenly become healed. Instead, you become more and more yourself, more and more whole, more and more capable of holding the full complexity of being human. You're learning to hold paradoxes that would have broken you before. You can be strong and vulnerable. You can be wounded and whole. You can carry pain and still experience joy. You can remember what hurt you and still choose to trust again. You can acknowledge your scars and still see your beauty. This is integration, the ability to contain multitudes without needing to collapse into one story about who you are. The work continues, of course. Healing isn't a permanent state you achieve once and maintain forever. It's an ongoing practice, a continual return to yourself, a daily choice to show up with honesty and compassion. There will be days when you feel like you've regressed, when old patterns resurface, when you wonder if you've actually healed at all. Jung would remind you that spirals are not circles. Even when you revisit old territory, you're meeting it from a different level of consciousness. What matters is that you keep showing up. You keep doing the work, even when it's invisible. You keep choosing yourself, even when no one's watching. You keep believing in your healing, even when you can't see evidence of it in the mirror.